Have you ever come across some wine terms that are a little confusing? I'm Heather Burton, wine expert from ABC Fine Wine Spirits.
And I'm Dan Eddy, also a wine expert with ABC Fine Wine and Spirits.
And we're going to sort some of that out for you. A common term associated with wine is body. Well, what does that mean?
Generally, you have light, medium, and full-bodied wines, and it's more of the experience on the palate than just the taste of the wine.
Alcohol content is the biggest textural component in wine. So I will tell you that a wine with a higher alcohol content tends to be more full-bodied. It's a textural component, heavier, more dense on the palate and on the finish.
So a light-bodied wine is very light on the palate. A heavy-bodied wine, you get that sense of weight and density on the tongue.
Body is also one of the most important things to consider when pairing wine with food.
Sweet, as a wine term, seems self-explanatory.
Sweetness is not necessarily sugary sweet or sour. It's more of a grade of sugar content and residual sugars on the finish.
People aren't always sure where that sweetness comes from, and it really comes from the grape.
Sweetness also has a big contributing factor to the texture of a wine, a lot like the alcohol content. So it does play a role in body as well as in flavor.
So depending on how you ferment and how long you ferment, you can get wines that have more sugar on the palate or less. So a dry wine has less sugar. A sweet wine obviously has more sugar.
And if you're ever wondering how sweet or dry a wine is, just refer to our shelf tag at one of our ABC Fine Wine and Spirits locations. It'll tell you everything you need to know.
Tannins are another important component to wine, especially red wine, though technically they exist in all kinds of wine. Tannins are a form of acid that really come from the grape skins, the stems, the pips, and the thicker the grape skins, the more tannin you're going to experience on your palate. Most of us experience tannins in something like black tea, that really kind of sharp flavor. In red wines, tannins tend to hit you on the side of the mouth, on the top of the mouth, where regular fruit acid tends to hit you more on the center of the tongue. Wines with heavy tannins often have more longevity for aging potential. Some people feel that maybe heavy tannic wines tend to give them headaches. This can happen. Red wines tend to set off histamine reactions more than white wines. So that usually is the cause. Some people like to feel that it's sulfites, but technically there are more sulfites in potato chips and dried fruit. So if you don't get headaches from those, you're not getting headaches from the sulfites in your wine. Sulfites occur naturally during the fermentation process, so all wines, organic, kosher, non-organic, all have sulfites. To get no detectable sulfites, you have to go through a secondary chemical process to remove them. Sulfites are a chemical molecule that exists naturally in the grape skins and the pips, which is one way they get into the fermented wine. They were also used in historical fermentation process to stabilize the wine, something that we don't do nearly as much now because we use refrigeration, and that does the same thing.
But what is complexity? Well, I'm going to answer that question for you. But before I do, I need you to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. What is complexity? It's complicated, but frankly, there are so many different aspects of wine that go into making, or not, the complexity of a wine.
How do I know if a wine is complex or not?
It's all layers, layer on top of layer on top of layer of flavor.
So you get an original experience, and then as you go back to the glass, it's different. And then you go back again to the glass, and it's different again. That to me really shows complexity.
There are certain things that winemakers can do that help layer the complexity in a wine. One of them is how long the grapes sit on their skins, which is otherwise known as lees. They use a tool to pump the wine over. It extracts solid particles from the wine skins, even in white wines. because they exist in all grapes. And it helps add a creaminess to the texture of a wine that wouldn't exist otherwise. Now, when wines, both red and white, are aged in oak barrels, not only does this add tannin from the oak, but it also micro-oxidizes the wine, which in a way condenses the liquids in it, makes the flavors more complex because they're more dense, and it definitely adds a broader texture component to the wine as well.
And usually wines that have a little more tannin tend to be a little more complex. One term that seems to create some confusion is varietal. And varietal really means the type of grape. The problem is, in the old world, they generally talk about their wines by region. So describe the wine by its region name, like Burgundy or Bordeaux. In the New World, we tend to describe our wines by varietal, by the grape type, because we plant all kinds of varietals everywhere. So you can't just say Sonoma Red and know that it's going to be Cabernet or Pinot Noir or Zinfandel or any of the other red grapes grown in Sonoma.
So let's talk about vintage. Well, I can assure you that I am vintage. That's not what we mean when we refer to a vintage of a wine.
Vintage really is the year that the grapes were harvested.
Not necessarily the year the grapes went in the bottle.
So we really need to look at when those grapes are harvested to get that vintage. There are many wines that are non-vintage, which means they're a blend of more than 1 year.
So what are legs? No ZZ Top references here. Legs occur when the alcohol evaporates from the glycerins in wine.
Legs in wine are sometimes actually called cathedral windows because the shape that they make reminds one of a Gothic cathedral window.
We've already talked about alcohol content affects body, texture. This is also one of the main components in legs.
Legs occur in wine because alcohol, water, and glycerin all evaporate at different rates, with alcohol evaporating the quickest. So as you're swirling your glass, that alcohol is evaporating, and therefore the water and glycerin group together, creating those distinctive sheets, which we call legs, down the inside of a glass.
Wines that also have a higher sugar level and alcohol level are going to produce more profound legs on your glass.
So now that we've all learned a little bit about wine jargon, I recommend visiting an ABC near you where we can answer all of your questions about wine. We pride ourselves on getting educated and sharing that education to make wine more accessible for everybody. And check out some of our other videos.